ora koutou, no mai haere mai, and welcome. And this week we're doing things a little bit differently, and we'll be taking a look back at some of the key hiring trends that have shaped our employment landscape over the past few months, revisiting a few standout conversations we've had with leading experts across the country. We've got plenty of insights to help you stay informed to what's really happening in your market as we head towards the end of the year. Let's dive straight into the show.
So this is our survey from last week, which is, do you think more employers will shift to a 4-day working week? Well, we voted very conclusively, 76.6%. Yes. So here to talk about it is Christian. Thanks for having me. So we've just shown it's certainly gaining some momentum. It's been sort of behind the scenes for a while, but I feel like it's coming to the fore. Everyone wants to know a bit more about it. Why do you think it's now coming up now more than ever?
Well, I think, when you look at the numbers globally of what's happening in the context of mental well-being, people's reported burnout, those sort of figures are on the rise. And people are finding not only the economic challenges, but the stress of everyday life more challenging, which does have an impact in the workplace. And looking at certain sectors and industries, there's just a lot more competing pressures on organisations, which means that pressure does inevitably get back to the people that are driving those businesses. And I think people and organisations are looking now, those figures really do not surprise me at all, because they need to find new ways of finding productivity. The labour productivity growth chart has been on the decline since over the last 20 years, and it's probably at one of the lowest points we've seen now than ever before. And I think organisations and people are needing to find new ways of working to really find that extra step in their business.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I was just thinking about, I was listening to a podcast, I think it was around when, might have been Henry Ford with the change from 6 days to 5 days, and everyone was terrified to lose productivity, but obviously showed that it was not something that was going to push you back, actually increase. So I wonder if it's one of those moments where we look at and think, yeah, it works, but it's obviously a change. I know you've done a pilot most recently with a fairly big organisation, and you implemented that. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so at my time working at Medibank, we introduced the 4-day work week, and how that model worked wasn't a compressed work week, but rather people got paid 100% of the pay for 80% of the time, but 100% of the work being completed. And that's a really important part of this. It's not a compressed work week, not trying to cram more in. You're saying to your team, and in that model, that, hey, if you get all your things done, if you get your work done, and we're still tracking well as a business, then we'll be able to afford you this gift of time, which is essentially how that model worked. And through that experience, Medibank, like many other organisations, looking for ways to retain people. It is a competitive talent market, and they recognise the importance of having a way to differentiate themselves as an employer. But they also recognise the importance of creating space and time and the impact on that for people's health and well-being. So it was advantageous for the business, but they also looked at the individual lens of their workforce and said, how can we make an impact to them? And they saw some really terrific results.
Mm-hmm. And with the challenges in implementing that, did you get much sort of initial pushback? Obviously, that's a huge organisation. There's a lot to get through. But what are some of the hurdles you came up against? I'm guessing it wasn't kind of, we're doing it next day.
There is definitely challenges. This isn't an easy thing to tackle. People have been working part-time for a long time, particularly, mums that have returned back to the workplace, and more recently, parents in general are adopting for part-time work, which is great to see. So part-time isn't necessarily new, but when you're talking about doing it at scale, that is a different challenge. And, some of the challenges was obviously, how do you make sure that you don't lose productivity? That's always the number one thing for CEOs and for executives, is how do you make sure that you're going to get the benefits of this and not lose your customers or lose your business. And so we set out to really set out a bit of a hypothesis and framed it as a bit of an experiment. So we said, this isn't necessarily a permanent way of working change. We're going to trial it. We're going to test it. If we can maintain our productivity, plus give the benefit of doing this for our team, that will mean that the experiment's a success, but it only comes at the keeping productivity at the same level.
Yeah, and I think that sounds like it's being trying to get across a bit of it works for business, it works for staff, it works for everybody, but yeah, it's looking at both sides, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were really structured with how we had taken that approach to measuring the impact of that, and we could really visibly see which performance levers, if you like, were driving, and how did that change. And we looked at 3 different dimensions. One, business performance. How were we going in maintaining our revenue and maintaining our customer satisfaction? Second lens was, how did managers feel that their people were performing? How were they going? And we got their feedback. And then the third level was the individual level. And, this stuff's been reported, their numbers have been reported in the media, but things like nearly a 30% improvement in sleep, overall health being improved by 16%, eating habits improved by nearly 18%. So when you look at some of those factors, that's a massive impact on people's health and well-being. And they've also reported some really good results on their productivity. Not without its challenges, but certainly worth looking at.
What are some of the common myths? I mean, you touched on it a little bit, but what would you say when you talk about 4-day working week, and you get people saying, oh, well, it won't work because of this, so you probably have it all. Yeah. What are some of the ones that have come up?
It's a really interesting one, Ben, because I think in some ways our culture is geared around being busy and hustling and getting lots of things done. It feels really good to get lots of things done off your to-do list. And when you're talking about making a change like this, I think one of the first myths you're breaking is, hey, doing everything on your to-do list might not be the right things that moves the business forward. So I think that's certainly something that you have to really talk to your team about, is what are the outcomes actually of the work? Because that's what you're making the decisions based on, not how many things have you done, how many meetings have you gone to, how many committees have you been a part of. Those things really don't move the needle on what's most important for your business. So that's definitely one. The second one is that there's certain roles that this would apply to, and there's certain roles that it wouldn't. And in the Medibank trial and in other trials, there's definitely cases to show that, hey, this actually has application across different types of jobs. It's not just people that work in the back of house or in corporate that could benefit from this. There's lots of research that shows that there's companies that have trialed it that have different types of working conditions in manufacturing. Lamborghini have actually done a trial. There was a police force in the US that did a trial, and they've actually made it a permanent adjustment. And there's applications that are happening across the hospital setting in healthcare too. So there's lots of different industries that this could work in, and I think the data is sort of showing that.
And I think from listening to what you're saying around productivity, I could imagine that could be people worried about certainly business owners, that sort of thing. But it really does make you question, what are you doing? And I think that's you're right. We're busy, but actually, what are we doing? And then and thinking about maybe that meeting isn't that important. It sounds like it'd be a good process for any business to go through, to look at, right, this will force you to throw everything up and look at it again afresh.
Absolutely. So, I think it's so much of what I believe in, why this is good for business, is it's going to force you to really see the opportunities in your business. It's going to,
that's all
your
for
team
this
are going
week.
to say,
Thanks
hey,
so much
we could
for
be more
tuning
productive in this area.
If you've got a topic
or
that
I'm
you'd
going to
love
go
us
through
to
these
dive
5
into,
steps of
or fancy
approval to get
joining
this
us as
thing
a
done.
guest, we'd love
Or
to
this
hear
is just
from you.
this technology
Enjoy
is just
the
not
Labor
helping
Day
us
long
get
weekend,
this
and
thing
we'll
done
see you
either.
next time.
So you're going to find those opportunities by just being open to a new way of working. It really affords you an innovation lens that you might not have had in your business otherwise. That's probably the third myth, Ben, actually, I think leads me into, is, I've heard from CFOs and CEOs, hey, well, our people should just be motivated enough. Like, why do they need to have a day off to be afforded to do these things? And there's something really interesting. We're not, in this type of work, you're not saying that people are not motivated. what you're saying is that with rest and time to recover, you're going to get better business performance. You're going to get better creative thinking. And, the Medibank data that's been reported sort of shows that as well. There's lots of other data that shows what happens when people are rested. They've got time to prepare things for their life. They've got time to go see loved ones that they wouldn't normally necessarily have to do, which means space and recovery time from work. And that has a really amazing impact on people's ability to perform in their jobs.
Well, I'm definitely interested, and there'll be many people. What is the best way to get? Where do you start with this? Do you think if your employers or someone's listening and I want to mention it to my employer, where's the starting block?
Yeah, well, I think the starting point is just trying to think about what in our culture could be the things where we've got opportunities to find that 20% of time, because that's essentially what you've got to be able to find. What are those opportunities to be more productive? And then looking at what are your people saying about their challenges in their life and in their work. Mm-hmm. When through the Medibank experience, and what I kind of have then since taken forward is this idea that you want to design your workforce around your culture strategy and the way you're working around it works for your team and your organisation. So the way that one company applies it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work in another context. So thinking about, approaching them with an open mind, and maybe what could be a really small experiment that you might be able to try. Could it be, hey, could we just find 2 hours every fortnight to have as a break? What would we take to do those sort of to take that opportunity? So I think experimentation is really what I'm getting at, and understanding if you're an executive or your CEO, talk to your team and understand what are their pain points and challenges of how they live and work.
And I imagine you could help us with it as well if it's something that, we're going to do it. That's obviously your role. So if anyone is interested to find out more, I'm sure they can reach out to yourself. We share your contact details. And thank you so much for joining us. We're really interested. I'm certainly interested to maybe try some of the baby steps you said. And we'll be watching over this year and see if it matches up with some of the stats we've got. And let's see if momentum keeps going.
Great. Well, I'm excited to talk to you then, Ben. Let's set up that time. But yeah, absolutely, you can reach out to me. I'm more than happy to have a conversation with anyone that's really interested in how they could adopt this in their workplace. Great. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Ben.
A recent report revealed that 1 in 4 HR professionals in Australia now classify workers aged 50 to 55 as older. Just 2 years ago, only 10% of hiring managers took that view, suggesting that many employers are now sidelining experienced professionals in an economy suffering skill shortages. With nearly a 15% rise in employers steering away from older job seekers, it is possible that we are overlooking Australia's greatest untapped workforce. But more importantly, why are hiring managers steering away from an older workforce? To discuss this further, we are joined today by 𝗪𝗵𝗁𝗪𝗁, resume writer and career coach at NB Career Consulting. So welcome today, Nadina.
Hi, thank you for having me to talk about this very pressing topic.
Absolutely. Can't wait to hear your thoughts and insights. So first of all, why do you think ageism remains so prevalent in hiring practices today?
Well, I mean, ageism has always been a part of hiring practices, and there is obviously bias against older people, and there's misconceived ideas of older people. I think when we look at recruiters and HR professionals, a lot of people are younger, so a lot of people who are doing the hiring process or starting that hiring process are a younger generation and are automatically drawn to their peer group. Why are we seeing this dramatic change in the last 2 years? I mean, that's quite concerning, and seeing that people are saying that people who are in their 50s, not in their 60s, are considered as old. I think there's a couple of reasons for this. if we look at technology, obviously that there's been a big changes in technology. So, we've had revolutions where we've moved to the cloud. We've got a lot of SaaS applications. There's a lot of different new technology people are using. And that's always been a challenge for the bias against older workers. People feel that they're not as good as using these tools or learning new tools. One of the major reasons I think for this is because we're about to go through a huge evolution in the workplace, where we are obviously going to be changing the way, or we already are changing the way we're fundamentally doing things. And we're going to be doing so much more, so much more is going to be tech driven. And I feel that number one, there's the bias about the learning the tools, but also that ability to change and pivot and remain agile in an environment that is fast changing. I feel that that's a distraction and incorrect. We'll talk about that a bit later. The other thing, when you look at the demographics of people who are recruiting and working in HR, these are people that they've grown up through the GFC, they've grown up through COVID, they've been really marked by those events. And they're in a world where we hear about, we can't get anywhere, you're never going to buy anywhere, global warming's destroying the planet. And I think, this might be a bit controversial, but I think in general that there is a bit of a feeling in some groups that, the baby boomers and Gen X are responsible for the destruction of society. And I do think that might be playing out as well a little bit in that they're seen as sometimes, not responded to some of these problems. And so that might be a cultural thing impacting it too.
Yeah, so many good points there. And the fact is, the reality is we are going to be working longer because we're expected to live longer, and the cost of living means that we inevitably can't retire when, unfortunately, as you say, the workforce is essentially shutting us out from that opportunity later in life. So what challenges do you think older job seekers commonly face when they're trying to re-enter or progress in the workforce?
So I think, and actually I think it's a quite important point as well, is that I think people that have stayed in the same role or the same organisation for a very long period of time have more challenges than people that have moved jobs on a regular basis through the workforce. And what I see in my business is I will see people that have maybe worked in the same organisation for, 15, 20 years. And so they're sort of caught in an area where they know what they know the skills that they've learned in that organisation, they know the software they've learned in that organisation. And then, they're seen as, employers don't like that. Employers do want to see that you have, moved your career and worked in different organizations and shown that ability to learn from different environments and different ways of doing business. That's one of the challenges. But I think also one of the other big challenges is that, older job seekers are lacking the skills to job hunt in the contemporary market. And maybe they're job hunting like they used to 20 years ago. And that's obviously changed quite dramatically and is changing rapidly, even as we speak today. And then there's other, challenges where, like I say, people think that they won't be able to learn the skills, they won't be able to apply, to learn new skills, to be agile in a workplace. And then another one of the big challenges older job seekers have is they're either deemed overqualified or underqualified for roles. And quite often people, when they are, some people when they're mature, they are, still really trying to progress through the ranks and are ambitious. But also a lot of people are saying, well, you know what, I've taken over the world. I've achieved a lot in my career. I really just want to work and do something that really resonates with me. And then they have challenges where they feel they're overqualified. And they feel that they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yes, I hear what you're saying there. So, and I've been with people to people for over 17 years, so I think loyalty is something to be proud of. But I understand that it can be a barrier as well for older workers. So, what are some of the biggest misconceptions employers have about older workers?
Well, the agility and the ability to change. I mean, if you look at, my generation is Gen X, and the changes we have gone through over the decades that we've worked have been astronomical, and we've had to respond to those changes with agility. I think that's one of the misconceptions. Another misconception is the ability to learn new skills and to learn new software and to perform in an environment. That's also a misconception. A misconception is that, people feel that older workers will be slower, may not have the great memory to be able to recall things. And again, that's a massive misconception of older workers. So I think they're kind of some of the sort of key areas is that, employers feel they either won't be as ambitious or as agile to change or able to learn new skills. And then one of the other misconceptions is that, again, if you take somebody who's worked for 30 years, had a career for 30 or 40 years, and, you're a younger manager in your early 30s, having, somebody who's older, who's maybe got many more years experience, will be hard to manage in the workplace. Try to tell you how to do your job or push back because you might make a decision and because they've got lots of experience they might be obstinate and try and push back on some of the decisions you make. And again, I think that's a big misconception out there.
Yes, absolutely. Stereotypical in that sense, isn't it? So what do employers risk losing out on by overlooking these experienced professionals?
Wow, they missed out on so much. First of all, you've got that knowledge and that wealth of knowledge and that skill. Now, as we go through our careers, obviously you've been in recruitment a long time, and I'm sure when you worked in recruitment, as I did when I was young in my sort of mid-20s, I was a high performer. I did really, really well in my job. But as I matured, I learned a lot more from my experiences, and I managed to avoid the risks. I could coach and mentor other people. I could make more strategic decisions. We risked losing that kind of knowledge base. And actually, particularly now, I think it's even more essential because we are going to be moving to an environment where digital tools are going to be doing so much more for us, and people will be, skilled at writing prompts, but will they actually understand the process without having somebody else do that for them? And I think that if you're using an AI tool and you are really skilled in writing the prompts or using that AI tool, but you don't understand the process or you don't understand the environment without using the AI tool, how can you challenge that tool, or how can you make those right decisions, or how can you handle problems? So I think that even more now than ever, we need to retain those skills within the workplace. So there's the knowledge. There's also, the reliability. People are a lot more loyal. We talk about people staying in a company a long time, but I'll do a CV for a graduate and then they'll come back to me in 10 months ago. I've got a great role, but I've done really well at it. I want to move on now. I know it. And they're really eager for that next thing. Whereas older workers tend to be a lot more reliable. They don't necessarily want to change job every year. The lack of emotion. I have some friends. I have a number of friends who have been very, very senior roles in business, and as they're younger, there was a lot more emotion involved in decisions. I think those emotions are much more tempered. I think people are a lot more level-headed. The reliability and that experience. There's just a wealth of benefits of doing somebody who's older. But most importantly, Liz, one of my beliefs is that good teams are made up from people with different backgrounds that have, commonalities. What you want is you do want a diversity of ideas or approaches to solving problems. And I've always been a very big believer that, you want young people in a team, you want older people in a team. It's really important to kind of have that spread because, a good team is complemented by people with different strengths and weaknesses.
%86 of Australians are already using AI at work and in their day-to-day activities. With AI now woven into everything from communication and data analysis to decision-making and automation, it's no longer just a tool for tech teams. It's reshaping entire industries. As the pace of change accelerates, professionals are faced with the critical question: evolve or risk falling behind? Knowing how to stay relevant has never been more important. So is your career prepared for the future impact of AI? To discuss this further, we are joined today by 𝗪𝗻𝗁, Director at 𝗁𝗏 Partners. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thanks for having me, Peter. Great to be here.
Now, firstly, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background and co-partners?
For sure. So my background is actually in accounting and finance. And so I started out as a chartered accountant, worked at KPMG. That was my first job. And I was there for a number of years. I worked in India for a period of time. And when I came back to Sydney, I then joined Arnott's, the biscuit company. And so I was there for another number of years, moved around through a couple of different roles and functions, ended up in a couple of like finance business partner roles. And I also worked on a very large AI predictive model digital transformation project there. And I also spent some time in Hong Kong as the regional head of finance for a Danish butter cookie company called Kelsons. And so we looked after the Hong Kong and Taiwan region there. And so when I came back to Sydney, that's when I started my business journey. And so today I run co-partners. We do corporate training and consulting focused around human skills and team performance. And so I'm also a sessional lecturer at the University of New South Wales on a Future of Work course, which is a super interesting course. It's one of our work integrated learning offerings where essentially our students work with real life industry partners on business problems around AI, automation, and the future of work. So I'm super interested in this intersection between like technical domain expertise, human potential, and then how AI augments human work.
Yeah, excellent. What an interesting background from finance, biscuits, and now in AI. AI has quickly become a major force in today's workforce. In what ways has it most dramatically transformed how we work?
Yeah, so there's definitely a shift from traditionally technical domain expertise where the valued skill is really what we know, and that's kind of moving towards how we apply what we know within a certain context, right? So we're kind of moving away from just being pure like knowledge workers, if you will, to being more like judgment workers, right? So we've got these large language models at the moment, which you said at the start, they can do all of these things already, right? They can like write reports, write emails, they can process data like way faster than most professionals and knowledge workers. And just recently, ChatGPT, they released their agent mode, which essentially means it'll set up this virtual like desktop and just do work for you based off of your instructions. And so I did test this briefly, and to be honest, I wasn't overly impressed by it just yet. But I also do recognize that this is the worst it'll ever be. Like it'll only get better from here. And there's this very interesting study that came out from Stanford University in the US. And so they did, it's been the largest study to date on the future of work with AI agents. And so they looked at 1,500 professionals and AI experts. They looked at a bunch of different things. And one of the things that they found was that workers increasingly want AI to actually take over those repetitive, low-value tasks so that they can focus on that higher value work. And so our head of the UNSW Business School, his name's Frédéric Ancil, he recently also interviewed the chief economist of OpenAI, who echoed this point. Right, they're saying that they've got all of this data on how people are prompting and how people are using ChatGPT. And what they're finding at the moment is that most of the use of their AI, at least at the moment, is complementing, not substituting humans. So essentially, it means that it's helping human workers be more efficient, be more effective, rather than replacing them, at least just yet.
Yeah. That's so exciting. And I know even in my own team, everyone's always asking, how can we implement it? How can we use it more? And they are definitely looking for those tasks to be taken away so they can focus on being out in front of more people, which is fantastic. How do we know if our current skill set is already becoming obsolete? And are there specific industries or roles that are more vulnerable to AI than others?
Yeah, it's such a big, important question, of course. I'm going to refer back to that chief economist at OpenAI. And so what he said was that sectors like healthcare and education, they're likely going to adopt AI slower, due to things like values and regulation and culture and things like that. So, we should expect, of course, these differences in AI adoption speed across different industries. Maybe sectors like finance and retail might move a little bit more quickly. But it's not really just about industry. And so it's really about the nature of roles and the nature of tasks within roles. And so in that Stanford University study that I mentioned before, they broke down over 2,000 tasks across over 100 jobs using what they called a human agency scale. And essentially what they found was that tasks that require deeper, like the interpersonal skills or real-time decision-making, these require more human agency and are therefore more likely to be future-proof compared to tasks that require less human agency, such as those that are more repetitive or more rules-based. And so the question isn't really so much, is my job safe? It's more around like which parts of my job actually need me and which parts of my job can be done faster or better with AI.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think the idea of being replaced by AI, and I think we've talked about this a little bit, is truly valid, or is it more about how AI is changing the direction of your work rather than eliminating it altogether?
Yeah, so just to touch on what the chief economist at OpenAI said again, AI isn't really taking jobs all at once, at least not yet. So it's kind of like, I picture like a bunch of little fish in a pond just nibbling away at the edges of jobs. And so, of course, some jobs are going to have bigger nibbles than others, but all of those nibbles are going to add up. And so, interestingly, that Stanford University study, their data showed that most workers don't actually want AI to fully take over. They want more of that collaborative assistant to help them with their jobs, to help them work better, faster, smarter. And so, those that can adapt, those that can evolve and leverage AI as their collaborative assistant are going to be more future-proof than those that don't.
Yeah. I look forward to AI making me more efficient and better at my admin tasks. What practical steps or advice would you give professionals to take today to help them stay ahead of the AI in the future?
I do get this question a lot, and I do also love an acronym. So I call it the ABCV in future-proofing yourself. And so the A stands for adapt, right? So the little AI fish, they're going to continue to nibble away at the edges of jobs. And so it's our job to get AI literate and experiment. So have a play, understand how to use these tools for your work at a bare minimum. Get a free account, or if your company or your work has an enterprise kind of version or license for you, then use that. If it doesn't, I would recommend use a free account or pay that $30 a month to get an even smarter little robot intern working for you. But of course, when it comes to work, make sure you check with your boss or check with your workplace on acceptable AI use policy. So A is for adapt. B, I'm going to need to excuse my language here a little bit, but B stands for BS detector. And so, we're moving into a world where trust and authenticity are going to be at a premium due to all of this seemingly overly polished AI-driven content. And so our BS detectors will need to be really fine-tuned. And so in other words, this is critical thinking. This is the ability to critically analyze and discern what is reliable and what is credible. And so the A is for adapt, the B is for BS detector, and the C stands for communication. So double down on those human skills. That Stanford report, it found that these human skills, they're going to be rising in value. Right? The more that we can effectively communicate human to human, then the easier it will be for you to build trust and connect with others, which people, we're going to crave more and more. And lastly, the V, and this one's a little bit of a different one. The V stands for values. And so what I mean by that is that things are moving fast and they're only going to move faster. And so I think it's helpful for all of us to just pause and reflect and ask ourselves, like, what is really most important to us?
Yeah.
What are we racing towards? Like, where does greater effort and time maybe in our work actually create greater meaning for us? Because after all, isn't this whole game meant to be about the journey and not just the destination? And so if I was to kind of summarize some actionable steps, is to audit your tasks, like audit your own job, and you can kind of group them into these buckets. So the bucket number one might be, what are the tasks that are repetitive or rules-based that you would like AI to fully take care of, like your admin? And then the second bucket is like, what are the tasks that you would like AI to help you with while you're still doing part of it as well? And then the third bucket is, what are the tasks that you choose 100% to do? Either because they require like deep empathy, judgment, or context that only you can bring, or maybe you just deeply want to do it and you don't want AI to ever do it for you, even if it could. What is that for you?
Yeah. Fantastic tips and insight from you today, Jeremy. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Peter.
Well, that's all for this week. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you've got a topic that you'd love us to dive into or fancy joining us as a guest, we'd love to hear from you.